Hey everyone, welcome to the channel Pokejager. I'm gonna do a different video than my normal opening videos. I'm gonna actually talk about cards that I'm actually planning to send for grading to our local grading company that's recently got established. They are Cardsandgrading, otherwise known as CAG. I want to do a video about this and basically run through each and every card, probably guessing what grade they'll get and what subgrades they'll get, and sending it them to grading and seeing whether we can get the grades fairly spot on, in terms of guessing, right? In terms of guessing what grades they'll get. I'm gonna expect, because the people that run the show, right, at CAG are Pokemon enthusiasts as well, so they would probably uh, have very good knowledge on what to look out for and how to grade. I would imagine they themselves would have sent cards to PSA, BGS, or the CGC to grade as well. So I'm guessing my expectation is, or what I'm actually hoping for, is for them to actually grade quite strictly, because I think you definitely do not want to have a grading company that just gives out grade 10s for almost every card that you get. That doesn't make sense. You kind of have to be a bit strict about it. And what I'm thinking, if you do that strictly, right, the value of the grades do actually hold some weight to it. There is high level of objectivity and unbiasedness. So I'm really hoping that they would, is in essence, grade my cards very critically. I'm gonna say it up front first. I don't think all of these cards will get a 10. That's 100% for sure. And I'll go through each and every card that I'm going to plan for sending in for grading. So I'm going to put this here for now. But what I will do is I would essentially bring this card out, because this is a card that I sent to CGC for grading. CGC is quite strict in terms of their giving their grades. You would see actually very few CGC 10s out there, to be honest, because they are that strict. Just a quick run through of this card specifically to set the basis of how we think these cards here will perform. So again, we will be looking at the four main criterias: the centering, the surface, the corners, and the edges, right? Now this is a base set 1999 Wizards of the Coast Blastoise Unlimited. It's a very old card. Bought this off as a single. Definitely there's some wear and tear on the card itself, but just let's go grade by grade, shall we? Subgrade by subgrade. So we're starting with centering, right? Just by looking at the card itself, you can see it's very obviously not perfectly centered. It's very top heavy compared to the bottom, and it's ever so slightly heavy on the right than on the left. So just looking at this, right, that's probably why it got a 9. If you go to the back, it's actually going to say the same thing. It's going to show you the same thing, because the cards are quite cut the same way that in the front and the back. So it's very heavy on the top than the bottom, as well as it is, if you can see from the light itself, it is definitely slightly off on this side as well, which is the right side of the card. So for surface, right, you may not be able to see through the slab, but I can tell you that there is definitely scratches on the hollow itself, because it is a very old card. And that's probably the reason, right? You can see some minor scratches here on the bottom left of the card. If I were to show you, try to show you the shine of it, and that's probably the reason why it scored a 6.5. Now I think 6.5 is a bit harsh, in my personal opinion, but I do acknowledge that there are visible scratches on the card. This is not a perfect surface card, rather. So for corners, right, Likewise, I think the corners could be better. I think an 8.5 is a fair grade. If you were to see the left and the top left and the top right, you can see the corners here on the top right is not as well rounded. Not as well rounded as the top left, you can see there. This is very nicely rounded and this is not. Let's look at the bottom. I think the bottom is fine, fairly rounded itself. And if you look at the back, you can definitely see some whitening in the bottom left corner as well. The top seems fine, but yeah, I guess this part here, together with the whitening in the corner, that's probably why it got 8.5 for the corners. And likewise for edges, the edges, there's definitely some wear and tear. You can see probably some very faint whitening here and there across the edges of the card. Let me see whether if I can show you. Can't really tell from the front. Maybe there's some wear and tear in the top left, if you can tell. And just tilt it this way, a little bit of wear and tear, but not absolutely visible to the naked eye, but nonetheless it's not a perfect 10 for edges, definitely 100%. So I think an 8.5 is a fair grade. Okay, so using this as a benchmark, I'm going to set this card here, right? Let's go card by card. I'm going to start off with this card here. Totally love this card. The fact that it's a Pokemon Center promo from Japan, I think this is an excellent card. Most Japanese promo cards do have very high print quality. So I'm going to just take this card out of the card saver. And of course, mind you, right, if you are intending to send cards to grade anywhere, basically, it is definitely more preferred to have the card kept, obviously sleeved up, that's by default. Try to use as smooth of a sleeve as possible, and make sure the sleeve has allowance in it, so it allows the card to be not so to speak, not squeezed into a tight fitting sleeve. So that's something that I think it would help, and I hope you agree with it too. Definitely put a post-it on it. I personally like to use a very wide post-it because it does help. Let me show you this. When you put this in, right, a lot of people have trouble getting the card in after the halfway point, because it is a tight fitting card saver, right? And most people tend to pinch or push the top of the card down into the card saver, and this might actually damage the edges of the top of the card, and you don't want that. So the reason why I use a very thick post-it note is because you can actually, if you follow what I'm doing here, you can move the card side to side. Because the post-it note is fairly thick, right, it is gonna give you that a bit of friction. Look, I'm not even touching the card, if you can tell. I'm just gonna slowly move the card left and right, and I'm gonna put it center in a position. I did not touch the card at all. I basically utilize the thick post-it note to essentially put the card in the card saver. So just a tip for you. Let me know whether it helps or it makes sense to you, but this is just my way of doing it. So I'm gonna just very gently take this card out from the sleeve, because I do want to share with you like directly, like without any interference from the sleeve itself, because you can't really tell. Now, first and foremost, centering, right? Just going back to this, centering, surface, corners, edges, right? Take a look at the centering. There's no complaints here. It is definitely a very centered card. Could be slightly heavy on the top than on the bottom, but you know, if you follow a 60-40 rule, I think this would pass. This may not score a 10 because the top is very slightly heavier than the bottom. However, I think this is at least a 9.5 or a 9 at the very minimum, and I'm trying to be very, very objective here. If let's say I were to grade this card, but if not, the left and the right is fairly balanced itself, right? So going on to surfaces, just looking at the sheen of the card, trying to show you against the light, the surface is perfect. No visible scratches, no print lines that I can tell, right? Look at that. no print lines, no scratches. I think this is definitely quite easily a 10 in my personal opinion. I've stared at this card for a while now, and I really don't see any visible damages to the surface of the card. And likewise for the back, I mean, it's quite flawless in my personal opinion. So for corners, right, again, Japanese promote cards very well cut around the corners. You can just look at it as such, very well cut in the corners, the left, the right, the top part, and you can see that there's another view from the back, very much well-rounded. So I think corners we can easily get a 10 for this, in my honest opinion. All right, last and definitely not least will be edges. Just looking at the edges, you can probably see more clearer by the back without the hollow. Very clean. Now I just realized that if you can see here, there's a little white nick at the top left, right? Now something like this would obviously impact the grade for edges, but this is a very small nick. If we are being strict about it, just because of this white dot here, it's not going to get a 10, but at the very least a 9.5, because all the other edges here, as you can see, right, it's all very clean. Maybe a little white speck here, but it's very minuscule. So yeah, I think all in all, centering, if you don't give it a 0.5 rating, I think at least a 9. Surface is definitely a 10. Corners is definitely a 10 in my opinion, and edges, because of the nicks, is a 9. So if there's two 10s and two 9s, it'll probably be a very weak 9 to weak 10 to medium 10, or a very strong 9. And if they were to give 9.5 as a grading, this will probably get a 9.5. So that's my prediction for this card. If for somehow or another this card gets a 10, I'm going to be very happy with that, because I'm going to keep this card for a very long time. I'm not going to sell this card because I absolutely adore this card. This card actually has a very good representation of the fact that it has the Pokemon Center stamp on it. I think that to me is pretty cool, right? That to me is pretty cool. All right, so we're done with the first card. Let me go to the second card. So altogether we have 6 cards. You'll see some duplicates for the last 4 cards. I'll get to those in a minute, and I'll tell you why I want to grade them. So next card is another Japanese card from Tag Team. Again, let me just slit this card out from the card saver and very gently take this out from the sleeve. Got this card off the secondary market. Just by looking at this card, right, it is so cool. I honestly just buy this card because I just think it's so cool. I think any kind of card that you have Charizard inside is gonna look cool, right? And this is a tag team, so it's tag team with a Reshiram, and it's doing double hyper beams and flamethrower, or whatever you want to call it. It's just such a nice looking card, and that's honestly why I'm gonna keep this card for a very long time. And since I'm gonna do that, I wouldn't mind putting in a slab and probably get a grade out of it. Looking at the centering itself, right, it is fairly centered. If I see from the left to the right, there's negligible, I mean it's almost perfect, maybe very slightly heavy on the right, but honestly it is as perfect as it gets. From the bottom to the top, it may be slightly heavy on the top, if just by looking at the black line as a center divider, right, you can see it's a little bit heavy on the top than on the bottom. So this may be scoring a strong 9 or a weak 10 for centering. For surface itself, just let me show you the shine. Like, honestly, there's nothing at all that would impact the surface. The whole card itself, it is to me flawless. Don't see any print lines, do not see any scratches, do not see any dents. So it's probably going to get a 10 of this. And likewise for corners. Just by looking at the corners, look at that. It's so nicely cut. And just go to the back real quick, you see, there's literally nothing that can pull the grade down for corners. Japanese card has historically been of higher quality than English cards. Last but not least, edges. So you've seen, right, like, all the edges are spotless, probably more visible from the back. There's literally no white spots in all edges. Look at that. It's super clean. So it's probably gonna score maybe a 9, a strong 9 or a weak 10 for centering. Surface is gonna be a 10. Corners is gonna be a 10. Edges is gonna be a 10. So all in all, if you average it out, it's probably gonna score a 10 for this card. So I'm gonna predict that this card will be a 10. Alright, let me just put this guy back in here. And again, showcasing you how much easier is it to essentially use the post-it note to essentially slide the card to your desired position. Look, I'm not even touching the card. I'm not even touching the card. And you know, that's good enough for me. Very centered, ready to be graded. Alright, now I'm going to go on to these last 4 cards that I'm planning to grade. As you can tell by now, this is essentially, I'll start with the English one first. This is essentially English and Chinese, or rather Japanese duplicates. This is the Japanese set, this is the English set. I actually got the English set first because I personally love the artwork of both Umbreon and Espeon. I believe this is from the Neo series. I forgot which one. Was it Destiny? I can't remember. I'll probably put a comment on the screen now on which set this is from. But it's definitely from the Neo series. It's definitely I just love how simple but at the same time stunning the card looks. I absolutely love Umbreon. I think it being partnered with the Espeon, I think is a fantastic card. And then when I saw the chance to actually get a similar pair but in Japanese for a fair price, I just couldn't resist. I just got to get it. Just by looking at this, you can see that there's a bit of a off-centering going on, but I'll go to that in a minute. Yeah, so that's essentially it. Let's start with Umbreon, right? Likewise, taking it out very gently. This is a very, very old card. I think it's considered a vintage card. So first and foremost, centering. I think for a vintage card, you can't get a better centering than this. It's balanced left and right, as well as the top and the bottom. Instantly, I'm going to say that this is going to be a 10 for centering. For surface, now this is where it's unfortunate. I'm going to show you. Now there's no scratches or damages to the card per se, but if you can see, right, the top right is more visible. There's actually print lines. There's actually 3 distinct print lines there. And because there are print lines, and there's 3 of them unfortunately, this card will definitely not get a 10 for surface. It may be a weak 9, but it may get an 8. Again, I'm trying to be on a basis that the grading is going to be fairly strict, because I do feel that you do need certain quality checks. You do need certain level of proficiency, a certain level of quality. Again, you do not probably want to dish out 10 so easily. So just by being very objective here, this surface is probably going to score an 8. I don't think it might score a 9. If I score a 9, I'll be happy about it, to be honest. But yeah, an 8 on a 9, I am okay. Maybe a 7, I'll be a bit pissed if it's a 7, but considering the whole card itself, there's honestly no damages at all whatsoever. Look at the sheen. Look at how, if I'm showing you with the light angle, right, look at how Umbreon is showing up from the holo. It's such a cool cool card, and that's one of the main reasons I buy it. Yeah, it's just totally awesome. Okay, enough said. Let's move on to surface. Like I said, okay, we talked about surface, probably gonna get an 8, centering 10, surface 8, corners itself, very well-rounded card on all corners. No complaints about it whatsoever. Look at that. No complaints about it whatsoever. Last but not least, edges. You can see that there's maybe very slight white dot here at the top, slight whitening on the left of the back of the card. Again, this is a very old card, very faint whitening all around, and there's even a white dot on the bottom right of the back. So because of that, right, I think edges, actually, if this is associated with corners, this is probably going to score a 9 for corners. The front looks absolutely perfect, but the back, just looking at the edge corners, yeah, it's not perfect. Edges is probably going to score a 9 as well. So if you talk about centering 10, surface 8, corners 9, edges 9, it's gonna be probably scoring a 9 grade on aggregate. So that is my expectation for this card. Alright, gonna put this baby back into its cradle. Likewise, card saver. Gonna shuffle it in very gently. It's having vintage cards is so precious, right? If you can get anyone in good condition, you definitely want to. Look at that, I never even touched the card. It just slid right in by using the thicker post-it. So I'm going to put this card right here, and I'm going to move on to its buddy, Espeon. It's going to be actually a very I actually bought these 2 cards separately. I really wanted to complete it. So yeah, Espeon, another awesome artwork. I think it's pretty cool. Diving right into the centering, I think likewise with the Umbreon, the centering is quite spot on. It's quite spot on. But if you stare at it for a second, it may be very slightly heavy on the top, but it's negligible. It's really negligible, right? Probably gonna get a 10 for centering, right? Just take a quick look at the back. Okay, so this is where the back, the look of the back also comes into play. If you see the front, right, the left and the right is quite centered, but if you look at the back, right, you can actually quite tell that it's a bit heavier on this side, on the right, than on the left, right? So this, if you are honestly being very strict about this, it's probably not going to score a 10. If it does, it's a weak 10, specifically for centering. But if it's got a 9, I would think it's a fairly decent 9, a decent strong 9. A decent strong 9. Surface itself, let's check it out. Any print lines on this? Honestly, I've looked at this card many times before. There is no print lines on it whatsoever. No print lines on it whatsoever. No scratches or dents. If I just shine the hollow foil to you, look at that, absolutely spotless. I'm gonna outright say that surface is gonna be a 10. Corners, it's pretty well rounded again for all 4 corners. Taking a look at the back, yep, quite well rounded. And just moving quickly to edges, you can see right here that there's a bit of damage there. There's a dink in the bottom left of the card, unfortunately. A bit of whitening here. A little bit of whitening everywhere actually. There's a little white shaving at the edges there, right? So for edges, right, it's not gonna get a 10. It's probably will get a 9. Again, a weak 9. It might get an 8 purely because there is a slight dent into the back of this card, unfortunately. I saw this card before I bought it. I was contemplating to buying it, but you know, sometimes if you like the card, you just gotta go for it. You can't, honestly, for a card as old as this, you can't exactly expect to get the perfect card. I mean, if there was any perfect card, you probably just got to buy a PSA 10 slab for this card. So let's be very objective here. If let's say I were to grade this among these cards, this will probably get an 8 for ages, right? So centering a 9, surface 10, corners, I might give this a 9 because there are some whitening at the corners, and then an ages an 8. So we have 9, 10, 9, 8. So this is probably going to score like a 9 as well if you average these scores out. Yeah, so again on 9 on this. Let me put this guy back here and again demonstrate to you how easy it is to slide the card left to right, and because you're already sleeving it up, hopefully you're using a smooth sleeve, it's gonna make this step a lot easier. And there you go, there you go. Put this baby right here, shuffle this card a little bit so that you can see the magnificence of it. So yeah, likewise, last two cards. Like honestly, I just want a Japanese equivalent to those cards. I wasn't actually paying much attention to whether it is a high grade card in that sense, right? Just by looking at this, you can see very off center. So let's just again start with the Umbreon. Alright, the design of the card is very similar in terms of how the Umbreon looks, the moon and the hollow pattern and whatnot. You see, it's very similar. Obviously the coloration is slightly different from the English set, but yeah, let's look at the centering. So this centering, it's way off, right? If you compare to the cards that we see before, this is a lot more off than the previous cards. Very much heavier on the bottom than on the top. Look at how skinny the top is. Left to right, it's fairly decent left to right, right? The back itself, like it's a lot more obvious with that red line, red border, right? You can just tell that yeah, the bottom is indeed thicker. Left to right is quite balanced. So just very objectively looking at the centering, it's probably going to be 9, I'm hoping, but again, it could be an 8, right? It could be an 8. If it's a 9, it's a damn weak 9, specifically for centering. But let's just give it an 8 for the sake of objectivity. Alright, surface itself, again, just take a look. It's a very clean surface. No visible scratches, dents, print lines. Very clean, right? Check that out. Very nice. I'm going to give it a 10 for surface. Corners, I think it's decent. I think the corners are fairly well cut. It doesn't look like it because of the centering, but I think it's very decent. Extremely decent. Especially for such an old card. I think this is, what's this? Oh dear, this is some kind of damage. I'm not sure what that is actually. Can't rub it off. Oh well. We will know when we get the grade, yeah. So yeah, corners I think pretty good. No complaints on the corners whatsoever. I'm going to give it a 10. Last but not least is edges. Don't see any visible damages on the edges in the front, but if you just look at the back, very slight white mark at this part here where my thumb is, as well as this part here, very slight. Maybe a couple of shavings of whitening at the bottom right? So I think objectively speaking, edges is probably going to get a 9 in my personal opinion. The whitenings are not that bad, to be honest, but yeah. So centering, it's going to be an 8. Surface is going to be a 10. Corners, I'm going to give it a 10. And for edges, it's going to be a 9. So 8, 10, 10, 9. It's probably going to average out around 9 as well, I think, for this card. But it may be an 8. It may be an 8. It's definitely not a 10. It really depends on, if one grade falls quite below the average, right, it's going to pull the whole grade down. That's just the way it works, right? just take a look at this card again. Like, look at this. We have a centering 9, we have 8.5 for corners and edges, but the surface being 6.5, bring the whole grade down to 7.5. 7.5 is way far from 9, obviously. So you can see how grades, each grade categories does play a part in the overall grade itself, right? So that's just my 2 cents there. So likewise, gonna put this guy back to where it belongs. So likewise, if it did score a 9, I will take it. If this score an 8 on average, I probably will accept it. I'm not going to complain, because I think there are certain things, especially the centering, that can be better on this card. Alright, let's put this guy there. Maybe put this guy right here so that you guys can see it. Last but not least, the Japanese version for Espeon. You can immediately tell, right, the centering of this card again is quite far off. This time is left to right, very obviously heavy on the right than on the left. Not too much actually. It's not too bad. Still pleasant card to look at. But again, if you want to be strict about it, probably get a 9, maybe an 8. Top to bottom, I think is fairly centered. Left to right, definitely heavy on the right. This might not even pass the 60-40 rule, to be honest, because it's just so thin on the left. Right? Just looking at the back, yeah, the back tells the same story. Look at this side. It's very much visibly thinner than on the right. So yeah, I mean, it might score an 8, it might score a 9, but if I want to be absolutely critical about this, let's just give it an 8, right? For surface, like by just seeing the surface, showing you the shine on the surface, nothing visible there. It's a very, very clean surface card. Very, very clean. So I'm going to give it a 10 as well. I'm going to give it a 10 as well for surface. Corners, Japanese cards, right? Very nicely cut corners. I don't see any visible defect to corners from the front and from the back. Last but not least, edges. Edges, I personally feel that it's the enemy of vintage cards, because you know, it depends on how you keep them from the start and how you handle them. But honestly, just by looking at it, I honestly do not see any whitening whatsoever. See, look at it. No whitening whatsoever. I like the Umbreon, right? So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think for ages this might be a 10. Like, I honestly do not. Do you guys see anything? I'll just go a bit edges by edges for the camera. You guys can take a good look at it, right? Like, I don't see anything, right, guys? So yeah, I mean, maybe sounding overconfident, but edges, I'm going to give it a 10, because I honestly do not see any defects whatsoever with edges. So yeah, so centering, again, being very strict about it, probably an 8, maybe a 9. Let's give it an 8 for argument's sake. 8 centering, surface 10, corners 10, edges 10. So it might be a decent 10, not a perfect 10 obviously because of the centering, but it might get a 9 grade as well. But if I do the average right, it might score a 10. I'm gonna say a 10, but I'm gonna say it's a 9, because again, centering, if I'm gonna be absolutely critical, if centering scores an 8, this card will probably come back as a 9. But if the centering is accepted to be a grade 9, then this card will average out to be a 10, because it's scoring 10 in my own perspective in all 3 categories: surface, corners, and edges. So yeah, it could be an 8, it could be a 9. Yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to share Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the grades? Do you agree? Do you disagree? If you don't agree, I mean, give me your own predictions. Just give me your own prediction. Where do you see the grades landing on each and every card? Yeah, I'm excited to submit this set of 6 cards for grading to our very own local grading company. I'll definitely do another video update and actually compare the grades that we anticipated on this video to see how we measure against what the actual grades come back with. So yeah, with that, thank you for watching, guys. If you like this video, please remember to hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, I really appreciate it. If you can subscribe to the channel, it will really mean so much to me. It will help the channel a lot. Thank you so much for spending this 35 minutes watching the video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.